Malik Carter walked into the high-end boutique, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. The air carried the scent of expensive cologne and freshly polished leather. Mannequins adorned in luxury brands stood like silent gatekeepers, their presence reinforcing the store's exclusivity. The customers, elegant, effortlessly wealthy, browsed leisurely, as if they belonged to an unspoken club. Malik adjusted the cuff of his designer blazer. He had been in places like this before, but the familiar unease still lingered. It was subtle but undeniable. The feeling of being observed, assessed, and, in some cases, dismissed before he even spoke a word. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, a lesson etched deep from years of experience. No matter how successful you are, some people will only see your skin. He exhaled softly, shaking off the weight of past encounters. Today wasn't about proving anything, it was about his father. His eyes scanned the glass display case, filled with exquisite timepieces. Then he saw it, the perfect one. A sleek platinum designer watch, a symbol of time well spent, of sacrifices made, of everything his father had given to build the life they had now. Malik nodded to himself and signaled to a sales associate, a blonde woman in a crisp black dress. She glanced at him, then at the security guard by the entrance. A brief hesitation. Then, instead of approaching, she turned slightly and whispered something to the store manager. "Mr. Richard Sterling." Malik caught the quick exchange, the way Sterling's brow lifted just slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line before he moved toward him. "Good afternoon, sir." The man's voice was smooth, polite, but there was something else in it, something just beneath the surface. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Malik didn't flinch, though the question landed heavier than it should have. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even about wealth, at least not entirely. It was a barrier, an invisible one he had encountered too many times before. His credit card could buy anything in this store, but it couldn't buy acceptance. He smiled, a slow, measured expression that carried its own weight. "Yes," he said calmly, his voice steady. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Malik stepped closer to the glass display case, his eyes locked on the platinum watch. It was sleek, refined, exactly what he wanted. A symbol of time, of sacrifice, of everything his father had done to give him a life where he could walk into a place like this and buy something without hesitation. He tapped the glass lightly with his knuckle. "I'd like to see this one," he said, his tone firm yet polite. The store clerk, a young woman with auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, hesitated. Her fingers twitched at her sides as if she was unsure of what to do. Her gaze flickered to Mr. Sterling, the boutique's owner, standing a few feet away. For a moment, nothing happened. The hum of quiet conversation filled the room, the occasional clinking of glass as customers inspected their selections. And then Sterling stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. His smile was thin, barely there, more of a smirk than a greeting. "Are you lost, young man?" he asked, his voice laced with amusement. Malik felt the words settle deep in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had heard this tone before, the kind that disguised an insult as a question, the kind that told him exactly where he stood in this space. "No," Malik replied evenly. "I'd like to see the watch." Sterling chuckled, shaking his head as if he had just heard something ridiculous. This isn't the kind of store where people, like you just walk in and buy things." The room grew still. The words hung in the air, undeniable, deliberate. Malik kept his posture straight. He had dealt with men like Sterling before. He refused to let them shrink him. "I'm a paying customer," he said, keeping his voice level. "That's all that should matter." Across the store, whispers began. Customers exchanged knowing glances. A man in a navy suit cleared his throat and turned away. A woman in pearls nudged her friend and muttered something under her breath. The weight of their stares pressed against Malik's back, but he remained still, his hands relaxed at his sides. Sterling sighed dramatically, placing a hand on his hip. "All right," he said. "Let's end this little game, shall we?" He gestured toward the security guard standing near the entrance. The guard, tall, broad-shouldered, his arms crossed over his chest, took a step forward. Malik frowned, reaching into his pocket. "I have a credit card. I can pay for the watch." But before he could even pull it out, Sterling's voice cut through the air. "I know exactly what you're trying to do," he sneered. "Don't even think about it." Malik's fingers tightened around his wallet. He met Sterling's gaze, unblinking. "What exactly am I trying to do?" he asked. Sterling took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel personal, intimate in the worst way. "I don't serve thieves," he said coldly. A sharp silence followed. The words struck Malik harder than he expected, not because he hadn't heard them before, but because no matter how many times it happened, it never lost its sting. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "I'm not a thief." But it didn't matter. Sterling lifted a hand and the security guard grabbed Malik's arm. The shift was immediate. The whispers grew louder, eyes widening in morbid curiosity. Some customers turned away, as if they wanted no part of it. Others watched, their expressions unreadable. A woman discreetly pulled out her phone, recording. "Let go of me," Malik said, his voice still calm, but there was an edge to it now. The guard didn't listen. His grip tightened, fingers digging into Malik's sleeve. "Sir," Malik tried again, "this is a mistake." Sterling only smirked. "The mistake was thinking you belonged here." And with that, Malik was shoved toward the door. His shoes scraped against the floor as he stumbled, catching himself before he could fall. He stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. The store loomed behind him, pristine and untouched, as if nothing had happened. People walked past him on the sidewalk, their gazes flickering in his direction before quickly turning away. And then, slowly, Malik lifted his head. He clenched his fists, not with rage, but with something deeper, determination. This wasn't going to break him, it was going to define him. Malik sat in silence, staring at his hands. The night outside his window was dark, the city's lights casting faint shadows on his bedroom wall. He had told himself to let it go, to push the day's events into the back of his mind, like he had done so many times before. But this time, it was different. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another notification. Then another. His chest tightened. With a slow breath, he picked up his phone and tapped the screen. The video was everywhere. Someone had filmed the entire thing. The accusation, the security guard grabbing his arm, the way he had been shoved out like a criminal. It had already racked up thousands of views. The comments were a mix of outrage and disbelief. "This is disgusting. Boycott that store. They do this to us all the time. Glad someone caught it on camera. Doesn't matter how much money we have, they'll never see us as equals." His jaw clenched. He wasn't sure if the knot in his stomach was from humiliation or anger. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Malik?" His father, David Carter, stood in the doorway, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Concern, quiet intensity. "You all right, son?" Malik hesitated, then set his phone down. "Yeah, just tired." David studied him for a long moment before stepping inside. "What happened?" Malik forced a shrug. "Nothing new." But his father wasn't convinced. He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. "I saw the video." Malik inhaled sharply, his fingers curled into his palms. "It's not a big deal." David's expression hardened. "It is a big deal. They humiliated you. They laid hands on you." His voice grew heavier. "They saw a young black man in a suit and still treated you like a thief." Malik exhaled, shaking his head. I don't want to waste energy being angry. David nodded slowly. Good, because anger without action is just wasted emotion. Malik glanced at him. What do you mean? David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. That store, Sterling's boutique. You know who owns that building? Malik frowned. I don't know. Some corporation? David smirked. Me. Malik blinked. What? I bought the property 10 years ago, David said. That store? Mr. Sterling? He pays me rent every month. A beat of silence. Then, Malik sat up straighter. Wait, you're saying? David nodded. I can evict him. For the first time since the incident, Malik felt something shift inside him. Power, not the kind Sterling had wielded. Petty, cruel, rooted in ignorance. This was different. This was real power. A slow smile spread across his face. When can we pay him a visit? David chuckled. Tomorrow. Morning came swiftly. Malik walked side by side with his father, their steps steady as they approached the boutique. The same store, the same glass doors. But this time he didn't feel the weight of judgment. This time he wasn't just another customer. Sterling was behind the counter, chatting with a well-dressed couple. He glanced up, spotted them, and rolled his eyes. Back again, he sneered. Look, I already told you. David held up a hand. We're not here to buy anything. His voice was calm, measured. We're here on business. Sterling scoffed. What business could you possibly have with me? David pulled a neatly folded document from his jacket and placed it on the glass counter. Your lease, he said plainly. Sterling's smirk faltered. Excuse me? I own this building, David continued. And as of today, you're no longer welcome in it. The color drained from Sterling's face. He unfolded the paper, scanning it with trembling fingers. His mouth opened and closed, struggling to form words. You can't be serious, he stammered. This is my store. David raised an eyebrow. Not anymore. A murmur rippled through the boutique. Employees exchanged wide-eyed glances. A few customers leaned in, watching the scene unfold. Sterling let out a forced laugh. This is ridiculous. You have no reason to evict me. David's expression remained impassive. Discrimination and policy violations are more than enough reason. He tapped the document. Your lease agreement has a non-discrimination clause. You violated it the moment you judged my son based on his skin instead of his money. Sterling's hands balled into fists. This is an overreaction. It was a misunderstanding. Malik tilted his head. You called me a thief, Sterling sputtered. Look, that wasn't... David took a step forward. You had no problem throwing my son out when you thought he was powerless. How does it feel now? Sterling's breathing turned shallow. His eyes darted around the store, searching for support, but none came. Employees whispered among themselves. A couple of them slowly removed their name tags and set them on the counter. Customers took out their phones, recording every second. Justice wasn't just being served. It was being witnessed. David exhaled. You have until the end of the month to vacate. If you fight it, I'll take legal action. Either way, you're done. Sterling's jaw tightened, his shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked small. David turned to Malik. Ready to go? Malik nodded. As they walked out, the weight that had clung to him for years finally lifted. Justice didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it was a quiet, undeniable shift of power. David placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. Respect is earned, not given. Malik smiled. Today, I earned it. Sterling's boutique was crumbling, not in bricks and mortar, but in reputation and dignity. What was once an exclusive establishment, catering only to a select clientele, was now a ghost of itself. The internet had done its work. Customers who once prided themselves on shopping there turned their backs. Negative reviews flooded every platform. Racist owner, disgusting behavior. We'll never shop here again. Boycott Sterling's boutique. This place doesn't deserve a single dollar. Watch the video, it speaks for itself. One by one, employees quit. No one wanted to work for a sinking ship, especially not one stained by discrimination. The boutique, once vibrant with business, was empty. And Sterling, the man who had stood so tall with arrogance, now sat behind his desk, his head in his hands. The chime of the front door made him flinch. He looked up, expecting another journalist, another protester, another insult hurled his way. Instead, it was David Carter, and beside him, Malik, standing taller, stronger, his eyes steady. Sterling's lips parted. A second chance. That's what he needed. He shot up from his chair, his voice unrecognizable. No longer proud. "Please," he started, his tone uneven. "I've lost everything. The business, the clients. I wasn't thinking. It wasn't personal. It was just a mistake." David didn't blink. Malik didn't speak. Sterling's hands trembled. "I built this store from the ground up. It's my life. He swallowed hard. "I'm asking you as a businessman to reconsider. I'll change. I'll make things right." David exhaled, stepping forward. "You judged my son by his skin, not his character," he said, his voice like stone. "Now, you'll see what judgment feels like." Sterling's shoulders slumped. His power was gone. The privilege that once protected him had turned to dust. And Malik saw the man for what he was. Small. Powerless. No longer a gatekeeper of privilege, but an outsider to a world that no longer tolerated him. For the first time, Malik felt something shift inside him. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. The boy who had been humiliated in front of strangers now stood as a man, unshaken. He had thought wealth was the measure of power, that if he dressed well enough, spoke politely enough, earned enough, he would be treated fairly. But today he saw the truth. Power wasn't in money. It wasn't in a name. It was in standing tall, speaking up, and refusing to be silent in the face of injustice. David turned away from Sterling without another word, and Malik followed. As they stepped outside, Malik took in the sight before him. The boutique, once a symbol of exclusion, was closing. The doors would shut for good, but something better was rising in its place. His father had made the decision before they even walked in. The building wouldn't sit empty. It would be reborn, repurposed, turned into a space for Black entrepreneurs, for young business owners who had been told, just like Malik had been, that they didn't belong. The boutique's final chapter was written in arrogance. Its replacement would be written in progress. Weeks later, the grand opening of a Black-owned business filled the street with life. Music played, laughter echoed, and customers walked in, free of judgment, free of exclusion. Malik stood by his father, watching people step inside a place that was meant for them, a place of opportunity. He smiled, feeling something deep inside him settle. Some battles choose you. What matters is how you fight back. As he turned to leave, he knew this was just the beginning. Racism wasn't a relic of the past. Malik understood that now in a way he hadn't before. It wasn't just in history books, in stories about protests and marches. It was here, in everyday life, in a high-end boutique, in the way people looked at him, in the way power had tried to silence him. He had thought that success, money, education, respect would shield him, that if he worked hard enough, dressed well enough, carried himself the right way, he would be treated like everyone else. But no amount of success could erase the truth, and the truth was, there would always be people who saw his skin before they saw him. But that didn't mean he had to accept it. He and his father hadn't walked away quietly. They had taken a stand, not out of anger, not for revenge, but because silence only allowed injustice to grow. The world had watched what happened in that store. They had seen a man lose everything, Not because of some misunderstanding, but because he believed his prejudice would always protect him. It didn't, and it never should. The store that once symbolized exclusion was gone. In its place, something better had risen. An opportunity, a space for Black entrepreneurs, for those who had been told they didn't belong. It wasn't just about business. It was about legacy. Malik had walked into that boutique expecting to buy a watch. Instead, he had walked out with something far greater. Purpose. He had been humiliated, but it hadn't broken him. It had awakened him. There were people who would never see him as their equal. That was their burden to carry, not his. What mattered was how he moved forward, how he used his privilege, his resources, his voice to help others who faced the same battles. He wanted to, because no one should have to fight alone. The world had changed, but not enough. Malik knew that now, and if change was going to come, people like him, people who refused to accept injustice, had to make it happen. Racism doesn't just live in the streets, he thought. It thrives in the places we least expect. Then he looked around, at the store that now welcomed everyone, at the people who had come together to support something better, at his father, who had shown him that real power was never in tearing others down, but in lifting others up. And he smiled. Because when people stand together, when they refuse to back down, when they fight for what's right, justice will always prevail.